For 2 years after the outbreak, I broadcast into nothing. Every morning at 6, every evening at 9, same frequency, same message, same dead silence coming back. I talked about the weather, the deer, the creek level. I talked because the silence was worse than anything out there in the dark. Then on day 731, a child's voice cut through the static. 5 words. "We hear you, Bridger Station." And that was the moment everything changed. Not because I'd finally been heard, because something else had been listening the entire time. Something that learned my voice, my patterns, my schedule. Something that could repeat my own words back to me in the middle of the night, perfectly, from somewhere just outside the tree line. I thought the radio was keeping me sane, keeping me human. Turns out it was painting a target on everything I'd built. And by the time I understood what was tracking the signal, the network of survivors I'd finally connected with was already disappearing station by station, voice by voice, into silence. This is the story of how communication became the most dangerous thing left in the world. Let me start from the beginning. Day 731. That's when the voice came back. I'd been broadcasting every morning at 6 and every evening at 9 for 2 years straight. Same frequency, same call sign, same message. Give or take whatever news I had about the valley, the weather, the state of the creek. I never missed a morning. Not when the fever took me in month 4. Not when I buried Colleen's dog in month 11. Not when the ice storm collapsed the south side of the barn. And I spent 3 days pulling timber off my generator housing with a fractured wrist. 2 years of talking into dead air. 2 years of spinning that dial afterward, scanning the bands, hearing nothing but static and the occasional ghost signal bouncing off the ionosphere from God knows where. 2 years of ending every broadcast the same way. This is Bridger Station. If anyone copies, you are not alone. And then on the morning of day 731, someone answered. Not just anyone, a child. The voice was thin, crackling through interference, but unmistakable. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, speaking with a careful, rehearsed quality that told me someone had taught him how to use a radio. He said 5 words before the signal cut. "We hear you, Bridger Station." My hands were shaking so hard, I knocked my coffee off the desk. It pooled across the logbook where I'd written 730 days of one-sided conversations. The brown stain bled through the pages like a wound reopening. I sat there for 11 minutes. Then I keyed the mic. Let me go back. Not to the beginning of everything. I don't have the energy to tell you about the fall of civilization in chronological order. And you probably know your own version of it anyway. The outbreak doesn't need another retelling. What matters is what it left behind, and where it left me. My name is Warren Olerud. I was 51 when the world got sick, and I'd been a county roads engineer for 23 years in Harney County, Oregon. The kind of man who knew every culvert, cattle guard, and washout point in a 100-mile radius. When civilization runs on infrastructure, knowing infrastructure makes you useful. When civilization stops, that knowledge becomes something else entirely. It becomes a map of isolation. I knew exactly how cut off we were because I knew every road that connected us to anything. And I watched them all become impassable in the first 6 weeks. Bridges dropped by the military, passes blocked by abandoned vehicles and then by snow. Forest roads swallowed by mud and fallen timber that nobody was going to clear. I lived alone on 40 acres my parents left me, 7 miles outside of a town that had never been more than 160 people. By month 3, the town was 14. By month 8, it was me, Colleen Pratt, and her Australian shepherd. By month 14, it was me and the dog. By month 19, it was just me. Colleen didn't die from the infection. Let me be clear about that. She died from a fall, stepped wrong on the frozen porch steps in January of the second year, and cracked her skull on the bottom rail. I found her 20 minutes later, already gone, steam still rising from the blood in the cold. The infection took the young, the old, the unlucky. But the aftermath, the silence, the broken steps, the ice nobody salted that took everyone else. The radio was Colleen's idea. She'd been a ham operator in the 90s, and she helped me get the old Yasu base station running from my father's workshop. We wired it to the solar array I'd set up for the well pump. She taught me proper protocol, proper call signs, proper procedure. She said someone would answer eventually, that the world wasn't empty, just quiet. After she died, the radio became the only conversation I had. Every morning, every evening, I'd talk about the temperature, the deer I saw, whether the creek was running high. I'd describe the color of the sunrise. I'd read from whatever book I'd pulled off the shelf that week. I told the empty air about replacing the water filter, about the coyotes denning under the equipment shed, about the way the ponderosa pines sounded in a February wind. I talked because if I stopped, I wasn't sure I'd remember how. For 2 years, nobody answered. Then day 731. The boy's voice. I keyed the mic and said, "This is Bridger Station. I copy your transmission. Please identify." Over. Static. Long static. I waited. The wood stove ticked behind me, settling. Outside, the June morning was already warming, the light cutting gold through the workshop window. Then, "Bridger Station, this is..." A pause, a whisper in the background I couldn't make out. "This is Relay 7. We hear you every day. Over." Relay 7. That meant there was a network, numbered stations, organization. My throat tightened, and I pressed my palm flat against the desk to steady myself. Relay 7. What is your location? How many souls? Over. Another long pause. Too long. Then a different voice, older, female, strained. "Bridger Station. We're going to need to confirm some things before we share location. Standard protocol, you understand? Over." I understood completely. Trust was the rarest resource left. Rarer than ammunition, rarer than antibiotics. I'd have done the same. "Copy that, Relay 7. I'll answer whatever you need. Over." What followed was a structured interview that took 40 minutes. They asked about my location in general terms, county, terrain type, elevation. They asked about infection presence. They asked how many people I'd seen in the last 6 months. They asked if I was armed. They asked if I'd encountered any military remnants. They asked if I had symptoms. They asked when I'd last seen an infected. I answered everything honestly. I told them I was alone. I told them the last infected I'd seen was month 9. A man stumbling through the creek bottom, already so far gone he couldn't climb the bank. I told them I'd watched him from the ridge with my rifle scope until he collapsed in the shallow water and didn't get up. I told them I hadn't seen a living human being in 7 months. The woman's voice came back, warmer now. "Bridger Station. We're going to give you a contact schedule. Same frequency, 0600 and 2100. We'll check in daily. There are things we need to discuss, but not today. Welcome to the network. Over." The network. I sat in my workshop after they signed off, staring at the radio like it had transformed into something sacred. The coffee stain was still spreading through my logbook. I didn't care. For 2 years I'd been talking to the radio, and the radio had finally talked back. The next 3 weeks were the most alive I'd felt since before the fall. Every morning and evening, I'd make contact with Relay 7. The woman's name was Daria. The boy was her nephew, Cass. There were 4 others at their station, which I gathered was somewhere northeast of me, maybe 100 miles, based on signal strength and the terrain descriptions they let slip. They were in a small agricultural valley, surviving on stored grain and a working well. They told me about the network piece by piece. 11 stations spread across what used to be eastern Oregon and the Idaho Panhandle. A loose web of survivors who'd found each other the same way they'd found me by listening. Some had been broadcasting for over a year. Some had joined only months ago. Each station had a number and a relay responsibility, passing messages along the chain when distance or terrain blocked direct contact. If this is the kind of story that keeps you listening, consider subscribing. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The network operated on 3 principles Daria explained to me during our second week. First, information sharing. Weather, migration patterns of infected, road conditions, resource locations. Second, mutual warning. If one station detected movement, human or otherwise, they alerted the chain. Third, no physical contact, no visits, no trade runs, no face-to-face meetings. That third rule should have told me something. At the time, I thought it was just caution. The infection's transmission mechanics were still poorly understood by those of us without laboratory access. Airborne? Contact? Fluid? We'd all seen different things. Caution made sense. But Daria's voice had a particular quality when she explained that rule. A tightness that reminded me of the way my ex-wife used to talk about her father. Not fear exactly, but a rigid discipline of feeling, a refusal to let something show. The network keeps distance, she said. That's how the network survives. Week 4, I started hearing from other stations. Relay 3 was a man named Olerud, maybe 60, former ranch hand, who spoke in short declarative sentences and had an encyclopedic knowledge of edible plants. Relay 9 was a woman named Tess who barely spoke but would sometimes key her mic during severe weather so the network could hear the wind and know she was still there. Relay 2 was a married couple, the Pachecos, who argued on frequency occasionally and then apologized to the network the next day. It felt like a community. Thin, stretched, ghostly but real. Voices in the dark, proof that the species hadn't ended. Then, on day 768, 5 weeks after first contact, Relay 4 went silent. It happened between evening check-in and morning check-in. At 2100, Relay 4's operator, a man called Stannard, reported normal conditions. Clear skies, no movement detected. Adequate provisions. At 0600 the next morning, his slot produced nothing but dead air. The network's protocol for a missed check-in was simple. Wait 24 hours, attempt contact on backup frequency, then mark the station as inactive. No search parties, no investigation. That was the rule. But Daria broke protocol. She raised me on a side frequency 40 minutes after Stannard's missed check-in. Warren, did you hear anything from 4 overnight? Any transmission, any fragment? Her voice was controlled but moving fast. I told her no. My radio had been off between scheduled times. She was quiet for several seconds. 4 is gone. Same as 6. Same as 11. What do you mean, same as? I asked. I didn't know 6 and 11 went offline. Another long pause. When she came back, her voice was lower, almost a whisper. 6 went dark in March, 11 in April, now 4. The pattern is, I need you to check something for me, Warren. Check your signal logs. Has anyone else ever attempted contact with you on this frequency? Anyone outside the network? I pulled my logbooks. 700 days of nothing. Then the network. No one else. I told her so. Good, she said. That's good. Keep it that way. If anyone contacts you who isn't in the network, do not respond. Do you understand me? Do not respond. I told her I understood, but I asked why. 2100 tonight. I'll explain what I can, not now. She signed off. I spent the day splitting wood I didn't need, trying to burn off the crawling feeling that had settled between my shoulder blades. 3 stations gone, a pattern. Something outside the network, trying to get in or following the network's signals to their sources. That evening, Daria laid it out. Not all of it, I'd learn the rest later, but enough to change the shape of everything. The infected aren't all gone, she said. You know that. We all know that. But what we've been seeing in the network, what the eastern stations reported before they went dark, is different. These aren't the shambling ones from year 1. These are further along. Further along how? They problem solve. They track patterns. They hunt. I sat with that. Through the window, the Ponderosa Ridge was black against the last light. A nighthawk called somewhere over the meadow. Stannard reported something 2 weeks ago, Daria continued. He said he saw 3 of them at the edge of his property line, not moving toward him, just standing there, facing his antenna mast. I looked at my own antenna through the workshop window. 35 feet of aluminum, bolted to the barn gable, the highest point on my property. They're following the signals, I said. We think so. 6 had a high-gain antenna on a ridge. 11 was running a repeater setup. 4 Stannard had a Yagi array pointed northeast for long-range relay, the most visible, most active transmission points in the network. And they went dark within days of reporting proximity sightings. Exactly. I turned in my chair and stared at the radio. The small green power light, the frequency display, the mic in my hand. For 2 years, this machine had been my lifeline, my sanity, my proof of personhood. And now it might be the thing that killed me. Why didn't you tell the network? Why didn't you warn everyone? Her answer came slow. Because if everyone stops broadcasting, the network dies. And if the network dies, we're all alone again. And alone in year 3, with these things evolving alone, is a death sentence. She was right. I knew she was right. The network was the only thing that kept any of us calibrated to reality. Without it, you stopped checking your perimeter, stopped maintaining your water system, stopped caring whether the roof held through winter. I'd seen it happen to the people in town, one by one, in that first year. Not infection, surrender. So, what do? I asked. We get smarter. Shorter transmissions, lower power when possible. No fixed schedule, we randomize windows. And we watch our perimeters. If you see anything near your antenna, anything at all, you tell me immediately. I agreed. The network shifted to randomized contact windows the next day. Check-ins became brief, coded, efficient. The easy warmth of those first weeks, Oleg's plant lectures, the Pacheco's bickering, the feeling of community thinned. Every transmission now carried risk. Every time I keyed that mic, I was painting a target. But I didn't stop. None of us did. For 3 weeks, it held. The remaining 8 stations maintained contact. No more went dark. I started to believe Daria's adjustments had worked. I reinforced my perimeter, cleared brush in a 50-yard radius around the barn, and moved my sleeping position from the house to the workshop loft, where I could watch the antenna from my cot. Then, on day 791, I saw them. Not at the antenna. Not at first. They were at the creek. 3 figures. Early morning, light barely up, mist sitting in the drainage like cotton. I was carrying water, 2 5-gallon jugs on a yoke, a route I'd walked 900 times. I came through the tree line and they were there. 50 yards downstream, standing in the water, not drinking, not crossing, standing, facing upstream, facing me. I froze so completely that the jugs didn't even swing. Every muscle locked. My rifle was on my back, but my hands were full. The yoke was wooden, balanced across my shoulders, and if I moved to drop it, the jugs would hit rock and the sound would carry across the water like a gunshot. They were human-shaped. That's the worst part of it, even now. The proportions were right. The height, the limbs, the way they stood. But the stillness was wrong. Living things shift their weight. Living things blink. These 3 stood in knee-deep water like posts driven into the stream bed. No movement, no breath I could see. I counted to 60, then to 60 again. They didn't move. I didn't move. The mist drifted between us. Somewhere upstream, a dipper bird called its sharp note, and one of them turned its head. Not fast, not the jerky, violent movement I remembered from year 1. Slow, deliberate, like it was listening. I took 1 step backward, then another. The yoke creaked. The figure that had turned its head shifted its body to face my direction. I could not see its eyes at this distance, not through the mist, but I felt the attention like a physical weight, like standing in front of a muzzle. I backed into the tree line. 4 steps, 5, 6, until the pines closed between us and I couldn't see them anymore. Then I dropped the yoke, unslung my rifle, and moved uphill through the timber like I was 20 years younger. Breathing through my nose, heel toe on the duff. Every lesson from 40 years of moving through these woods, firing at once. I reached the workshop and locked the door. Sat on the floor with my back to the workbench, rifle across my knees. Waited until my heart rate dropped below 100. When I raised Daria that evening, she listened without interrupting. Then, facing upstream, toward the sound of the water, or toward you. I don't know. I was upstream of them. And they didn't pursue? Not that I could tell. I didn't look back. That's new behavior for your area. 2 years of nothing, and now 3 at your water source. Warren, when was your last high-power transmission? I thought about it. I'd been running the standard 15 watts for scheduled check-ins. But 3 days earlier, I'd tried to reach Relay 2 the Pachecos who'd reported a weak signal. I'd boosted to 60 watts for about 4 minutes. 3 days ago, 60 watts, maybe 4 minutes. Daria didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice had that tightness again. Don't do that again. 15 or under, always. Understood. Warren, how far is your creek from your antenna? A quarter mile, maybe less. They're mapping you. Not attacking, mapping. They found the signal source, and now they're finding everything around it. Water, game trails, access points. They did this to 6. Oleg heard it happening over the radio before 6 went dark. I spent that night in the loft, watching through the slats toward the creek drainage. Nothing moved, but I could feel the shape of the world changing around me. For 2 years, this place had been safe because it was invisible. Now, it was visible. The radio had made it visible. The logical thing was to stop transmitting. Tear down the antenna. Go dark like the stations that had disappeared. But going dark was also what the disappeared stations had done involuntarily, permanently. I didn't know if silence would make the things leave, or if they'd simply close in once they confirmed no response would come. And there was the network. 8 stations depending on each relay point. If I went dark, the chain broke between Daria and 2 western stations that could only reach the network through me. 3 more people cut off. 3 more voices lost. I kept broadcasting. The next 12 days, I saw them 4 more times. Never at the creek again. I started collecting water at night, moving by starlight on a longer route that kept the barn between me and the drainage. I saw them at the tree line, south of the meadow. 2, then 3, then 5. Always still, always watching, never approaching the buildings. I reported every sighting. Daria cataloged them, cross-referencing with what other stations reported. A pattern emerged. The things would observe a location for 1 to 3 weeks before acting. They were patient in a way that no Year 1 infected had ever been. These were something else. Something further down whatever evolutionary road the infection had opened. On day 803, Oleg raised me on the morning frequency with a voice I barely recognized. Flat, empty. Bridger, they took my antenna last night. They what? Climbed the mast, pulled the yagi off the top, carried it away. I didn't know what to say. I sat there with the mic in my hand, trying to process that. They climbed. They manipulated objects. They removed the part of the structure that transmitted. Oleg, are you secure? For now. I'm on a backup handheld, low power. Can't reach anyone but you. Warren, they didn't come inside. They took the antenna and left, like they were removing it, not destroying it, removing it. Where did they take it? East, into the timber. I watched from the roof with a flashlight. 3 of them. 1 climbed. The other 2 waited. If you're still here wondering what I'd do, what you'd do, drop a comment. Now let me tell you what happened after that. Daria convened what she called a network conference that evening. 6 stations patched together through relay chains. The most voices I'd ever heard at once on the frequency. The sound was haunting. 6 survivors scattered across a dead landscape, speaking in hushed tones about beings that were learning to dismantle our only connection to each other. The debate was brief because there were only 2 positions. Tess, who rarely spoke, broke her silence to say what half of us were thinking. Shut down, go dark, survive locally, in silence, invisible. The Pachecos disagreed. Silence is what they want, Luz Pacheco said. They're isolating us, cutting the herd. Once we can't warn each other, they pick us off one at a time. Daria sided with Luz. We adapt, she said. Mobile antennas. Transmit from a different location each day. Never from your home base. Make them chase a signal that moves. It was a good plan. It was an exhausting plan. It meant carrying equipment into the field, setting up a portable mast, broadcasting, breaking down, and returning all while those things watched from the trees. But it was the only plan that kept the network alive without making our homes into beacons. I started the next morning. Packed my handheld, a 12-foot telescoping whip antenna, and a small battery into a frame pack. Hiked 2 miles north to a basalt outcrop I knew. Set up, made my 15-second check-in with Daria, broke down, and hiked home by a different route. It worked. For a week, it worked. The figures at my tree line disappeared. Daria reported the same. The watchers near her station dispersed once she stopped transmitting from her fixed antenna. The network breathed again. But on day 814, Oleg missed his check-in. 24-hour protocol. Backup frequency attempt, nothing. Relay 3 went dark. I felt it like a physical blow. Oleg, with his quiet knowledge of Bitterroot and commas. Oleg, who once spent an entire evening transmission describing how to prepare pine bark flour so it didn't taste like turpentine. Gone. And worse, I didn't know if he'd gone dark because they got him, or because his backup handheld finally died, or because he decided silence was safer than my relay. I would never know. That uncertainty was its own kind of wound. 5 stations left. The network was shrinking. Every loss cascaded longer relay chains, weaker connections, more gaps in coverage. The web was becoming a thread. Day 820. I was on my way to a new transmission point, a hillside clearing 2 miles west of my property, when I found the antenna. Oleg's antenna. The Yagi they'd taken from his mast. It was leaning against a juniper tree at the edge of the clearing I'd been using. Pointed west, toward me, placed there, deliberately. I stood 10 feet from it and felt the world go very quiet. The birds were still singing. The wind was still moving the grass, but something underneath all of it had shifted. They hadn't just taken Oleg's antenna. They'd brought it here, to a place I'd transmitted from. They were tracking my mobile pattern. They'd learned. I didn't touch it. I backed away, returned home by a circuitous route that took 3 hours, and I didn't broadcast that evening. The next morning, I raised Daria and told her. She was quiet for a long time. "They're using the antenna as a marker," she said finally. "Or a lure, or a message." "What kind of message?" "That they know, that they're ahead of us." I told her I wanted to tear down my fixed antenna. Just take it down, deny them the landmark. She talked me out of it. Your fixed antenna is your fallback if your portable setup fails. And if you take it down, you're telling them you know they're watching. Right now, unpredictability is our only advantage. Keep the pattern random. Don't transmit from that clearing again. Find new sites. I did. I started using 6 different transmission points on a randomized rotation, chosen by dice roll each morning. I varied my times within the windows. I kept power at 5 watts, barely enough to reach Daria, who was closest to me in the chain. The network contracted, became whispered, became fragile. Day 833. Daria told me something she'd been holding back. "Warren, I need to tell you about the other networks." "Other networks?" "We're not the only cluster. There was a group in the Willamette Valley. 15 stations. Better equipment, higher power. They were organized, structured, almost like a functioning community. They went dark. All of them. Over the course of 6 weeks, station by station. The last one to go was a man named Greer, who broadcast a final message that 3 of our stations received before we established relay contact with him. What did he say? He said they came to his door and stood there. He said they stood there for 2 days. He said on the 3rd day, they started mimicking his broadcasts, replaying fragments of his own voice back at his antenna. He said the sound of his own voice coming from their mouths was the worst thing he'd ever heard. Then his signal cut. The wood stove was dead. I hadn't fed it. The workshop was cold despite the August heat outside. Something about what she was telling me made the temperature wrong. They mimic? They learn. Whatever the infection does to them, it doesn't destroy the brain. Not entirely. It repurposes it. They learn behaviors. They learn patterns. They learn that radio signals mean prey. And now they're learning to use those signals themselves. To do what? To draw people out. Greer's last transmission was received by 3 stations. 2 of those stations reported hearing Greer's voice on the frequency again. 3 days after he went dark, calling for help, using his call sign. 2 operators almost responded before the 3rd warned them off. I sat back in my chair. The implications unfolded one by one, each worse than the last. They could mimic voices. They could replay transmissions. They could use our own communication system against us, not by destroying it, but by inhabiting it, by becoming indistinguishable from us on the airwaves. Daria, how do I know you're real? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was careful. You don't, not with certainty. That's why we established the coded check system in week 2, the rotating daily codes. She was right. We had a simple cipher system, a date-based word that each operator included in their first transmission of the day. If the word was wrong or absent, you didn't trust the transmission. But they learn, I said. If they can replay fragments, they can eventually replay the right code on the right day. Yes, eventually. That's why we update the cipher monthly. That's why voice quality matters. You know my voice, Warren. You know Luce's voice. You know Cass's voice. Trust your ear. I wanted to trust my ear. But I thought about Greer's operators hearing Greer's own voice calling for help and not being able to tell the difference until someone warned them. I thought about how perfectly a mimic could replicate a voice if it had been listening for weeks, months. How long had they been listening to me? 2 years of broadcasting. 700 days of my voice going out into the air, carrying with it the patterns of my speech, my cadence, the particular way I said over, the way I cleared my throat before long transmissions, the way I described the weather. 2 years of training material. If they could mimic Greer after weeks, what could they do with 2 years of me? Daria, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. Go ahead. Have any stations in the network reported hearing my voice when I wasn't transmitting? Silence. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Daria. Relay 9. Tess. 6 days ago. She said she heard your morning weather report on the frequency at 3 a.m. She said it was your voice, your cadence, your phrasing. She said it was perfect, except it was the wrong time. I closed my eyes. Outside, a woodpecker hammered somewhere in the pines. Rhythmic, mechanical, like a signal. Why didn't you tell me? Because there was nothing you could do about it. And because I needed you to keep broadcasting. Warren, you're the linchpin of the Western Relay. Without you, Tess and the Pachecos are cut off. You go dark, 3 stations lose contact. I couldn't risk you panicking and pulling the plug. She was right that I was the linchpin. She was wrong that I would have panicked. But the calculations she'd made keeping me in the dark to preserve the network told me something important about Daria. The network was her mission, more than any individual in it. The web itself was what she was trying to save, even at the cost of the people in it. I understood that. I didn't agree with it, but I understood it. What do we do now? I asked. Now you know. Now you watch for it. If you hear your own voice on the frequency, mark the time and tell me. We need to know how accurate they're getting. We need to know if they're improving. Day 840. I heard it. 3 in the morning. I'd left the radio on, volume low, as I often did, an old habit from the early days when I'd fall asleep hoping to hear any human voice on any channel. The sound that woke me wasn't loud. It was familiar. That was worse. My own voice, speaking calmly from the speaker. Temperature at dawn was 36 degrees. Creek running about 8 inches below normal for this time of year. Saw a red-tailed hawk hunting the south meadow. No movement overnight. This is Bridger Station. If anyone copies, you are not alone. Word for word, inflection for inflection, it was me. It was perfectly me. Except it was August. and the temperature at dawn had been 58 degrees, and the creek was running high from snowmelt, not low. They were replaying an old broadcast, a winter one, months old. They had it stored in their memory, in whatever biological mechanism held these recordings. They were broadcasting it from somewhere close enough to reach my receiver clearly. I lay on my cot in the loft, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own ghost speak from the radio. It repeated 3 times, then stopped. The static returned. I did not sleep again that night. In the morning, I told Daria. She logged it with the same flat efficiency she logged everything. Then she told me something that made the floor feel less solid. Relay 2 went dark last night. The Pachecos. No check-in at 0600. No response on backup. Los and Hector, the couple who bickered on frequency and apologized the next day, gone. That leaves 4 of us, I said. 4 stations, 5 people. Her voice was thin. Warren, I need to tell you something else. Cass, my nephew, he's been monitoring the overnight frequencies as part of our watch rotation. Last night, before 2 went dark, he heard Luz Pacheco's voice on the channel, calling for Hector, saying she was outside and needed him to open the door. Was it really her? No. Cass said it was her voice, but the words were wrong. The phrasing. Luz would never call Hector by his full name. She called him Tori. Everyone knew that. But the mimic said Hector. It was close, but not perfect. Not yet. Not yet. Those 2 words carried everything. They were getting better, learning, refining. But they weren't perfect yet. That was our margin. A shrinking margin, maybe only weeks wide. They'd learn the nicknames. They'd learn the codes. They'd learn everything, given enough time. Daria, we can't just keep broadcasting and waiting for them to get good enough to fool us. I know. Then what? There's a place, she said. I wasn't going to bring it up until we had no other option. I think we're there. There's a facility, a Forest Service fire lookout on Sawtooth Ridge. It's 7,000 feet, remote. The access road is destroyed. Has been since year 1. But the important thing is no radio equipment. No transmissions have ever come from there. It's invisible to them because it's never been a signal source. You want to relocate. I want to consolidate. All remaining stations. 4 operators, 1 location. High ground, defensible sight lines, no electromagnetic signature. We go silent, we go together, we survive. That means crossing open country. Yes. That means leaving everything we've built. Yes. That means killing the network. The network is already dead, Warren. We're just the last ones who haven't admitted it. I stared out the window at my barn, my workshop, my 40 acres. The garden Colleen and I had fenced. The chicken run I'd built in month 5, empty now but still standing. The woodshed with 2 cords of pine stacked and drying for a winter I might not spend here. 2 years. 2 years of holding this ground, maintaining this broadcast, talking into the dark on the faith that someone would hear. And someone had heard. And hearing had brought the darkness closer. How far is the lookout from me? 63 miles by the route I've planned. 4 days on foot with gear. Elevation gain of 3,800 feet in the last 8 miles. And from you? 41 miles, 3 days. Tess? Tess is, I can't reach Tess, Warren. Not since yesterday. Another one. Quiet Tess, who keyed her mic in storms so we could hear she was alive. Gone. 3 of us then. 3 of us. Me, Cass, and you. I'm going to give you the route coordinates. Memorize them. Do not write them down. Do not transmit them. If they're listening, and they are, they cannot know where we're going. She read me a series of waypoints. I committed them to memory the way I'd memorized county road junctions for 23 years. Grid references, terrain features, water sources. A path that wound through timber and ridgeline, avoiding open valleys and creek bottoms where the things seemed to congregate. "We move in 4 days," Daria said. September 2nd. Radio silence starts at midnight on September 1st. After that, no transmissions, no exceptions. We meet at the lookout on September 6th. If either of us isn't there by the 7th, the other doesn't wait. Daria. Yes? What if they follow us, not to signal us, physically? What if they've been watching long enough to track us by sight? That's why we move before dawn. That's why we take the timber routes. That's why we move fast and don't stop. I spent the next 3 days preparing. Packed my frame with essentials: water filter, dried meat, fire kit, sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees, topo maps, compass, first aid, ammunition. I stripped the radio workshop of anything useful, the handheld, spare batteries, solar charger. Then I did something that felt like surgery. I dismantled the Yasu, took it apart piece by piece, wrapped the components in cloth and buried them in the crawl space under the workshop. If I came back someday, I'd have it. If I didn't, it wouldn't be there for them to find and learn from. The last thing I did was climb the barn and unbolt the antenna. 35 feet of aluminum, lowered section by section, laid flat in the grass behind the barn. Without it standing, my property looked different, diminished, like a flag lowered. September 1st, final broadcast, 2100. This is Bridger Station, final transmission. To anyone still listening on any frequency, the network in Eastern Oregon is going dark. Not because we failed, because we're adapting. If you are human, if you are real, if you are surviving, trust your ears. Trust the small things that only a human would get wrong. The hesitations, the imperfections, the moments when someone says something that surprises you. Those are the things they can't copy. Not yet. This is Warren Olerud, signing off. Bridger Station is dark. I turned off the radio. The green light died. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I left before dawn on September 2nd, walking into the dark with my pack and my rifle, the stars cold overhead, the Ponderosa Ridge a black wall to the east. My property fell behind me one step at a time. The garden, the workshop, the barn without its antenna. 2 years of survival compressed into what I could carry on my back. The first day I covered 19 miles through timber. The route followed ridgelines where I could see my surroundings, and the going was easier on pine duff. I saw no one, heard nothing unusual. Stopped twice for water, once for food. Kept moving. The second day, descending into a drainage crossing, I found footprints. 3 sets, bare feet, pressed deep into the mud at the creek bank. Heading east, the same direction I was traveling. Fresh. Hours old at most, based on how the water was still seeping into the impressions. I crossed a 1/4 mile upstream, moving through ankle-deep water to mask my own tracks. Climbed the far bank and pushed hard through thick timber for 2 hours before stopping to listen. Nothing. But I moved faster after that. Day 3. The terrain steepened. I was into the transition zone, Ponderosa giving way to fir and then to subalpine country. The air thinned. My pack felt heavier. I was 51 years old and 2 years into a limited diet. And 63 miles over 3 days was asking more than my body wanted to give. I made camp at dusk in a rock alcove at 6,000 feet. No fire, cold food, water from snowmelt. I sat in my sleeping bag with my rifle across my lap and watched the dark. Somewhere below me, in the drainage I'd crossed that morning, Something moved. I couldn't see it, but I heard it, a sound like a person walking, rhythmic, unhurried, moving in the same direction I'd traveled, following. I didn't sleep. Day 4. The last 8 miles. 3,800 feet of elevation gain. My legs burned. My lungs worked hard in the thin air. But Sawtooth Ridge was ahead of me, a granite spine cutting the sky, and at its peak, barely visible against the clouds, the square silhouette of the fire lookout. I reached it at midday. The access road was gone, washed out by a debris flow years before the outbreak, never repaired. The lookout itself was a standard Forest Service structure. Glass-walled cabin on a concrete foundation, 10 feet by 10 feet, mounted on a 4-legged steel tower. A catwalk surrounded it. The stairs were intact but rusted. No one was there. I climbed. The view opened in every direction, 100 miles of ridges and valleys, green and gray and blue, stretching to a horizon I hadn't seen in 2 years. The lookout was dusty but intact. A cot, a desk, a wood stove barely big enough to heat the tiny space. Dead radio equipment on a shelf, Forest Service vintage, useless. I sat on the catwalk and waited. Daria arrived on September 5th. I saw her from 2 miles out, a small figure and a smaller one, moving up the talus slope from the northeast. I watched them through my rifle scope. A woman, maybe 40, dark hair pulled back, carrying a pack that seemed too large for her frame. And Cass, the boy who'd first answered my broadcast. Thin, dark-eyed, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd been taught to walk quietly. They reached the lookout at 1500. Daria looked up at me on the catwalk and didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped an inch. Relief, I think. She hadn't been certain I'd be real. I hadn't been certain she'd be real either. Cass climbed the stairs first. He looked at me, this old man he'd only known as a voice, and said, "You sound different in person." "Deeper," I said. "Radio compresses the range." He nodded, serious, like that was important data. Then Daria was up the stairs, and we were 3 people in a 10 by 10 glass box on top of a mountain. And the network was over, and we were alive. And below us, the world went on being broken. That night, Daria told me the rest, what she hadn't said over the air. The things she'd learned from the Willamette group before they went dark, from Relay 6 before it fell, from her own observations. The infected were converging. Not randomly, not in search of food, they were following infrastructure. Power lines, roads, communication towers. The architecture of the old world was their map. Every wire, every mast, every remnant of human signal was a trail marker to them. They were retracing civilization's nervous system, node by node, hunting anything still connected. "The lookout is safe because it was never connected," she said. "No power lines up here, no repeater equipment, no cell tower. It's a dead zone, invisible." "For how long?" I asked. "As long as we stay silent." We stayed silent. Days became weeks. The 3 of us developed routines. Water from snowmelt pools on the north face. Food from what we'd carried, supplemented by the alpine plants Oleg had taught me about over the radio, his voice still useful even now. Warmth from the tiny stove. Burning dead white bark pine that Cass and I hauled up in bundles. It was quiet. Painfully quiet. After 2 years of daily broadcasts, the silence pressed against my ears like altitude. I'd catch myself reaching for a mic that wasn't there, composing weather reports in my head, describing the sunrise to an audience of empty air. One morning in late September, Cass found me sitting on the catwalk at dawn, lips moving slightly. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. "Nobody. Habit." He sat down next to me. His feet didn't reach the edge of the catwalk, dangling in open air above the granite. "Aunt Daria says you talked to the radio for 2 years before anyone answered." "That's right." "Why?" I thought about it. Below us, the valleys were filling with the season's first fog, white and thick, hiding everything beneath. Because stopping felt like agreeing that no one was left. And I wasn't ready to agree to that. He was quiet for a while. Then, "Are you still not ready?" I looked at him. 11 years old, maybe. Born into a world that collapsed before he learned to drive. He'd never had a normal conversation that wasn't conducted over radio waves or in whispered tones. And he was asking me if I still believed anyone was out there. I thought about Oleg, Tess, the Pachecos, Stannard, all the voices that had answered and then gone quiet. I thought about the 11 stations, reduced to 0. I thought about the Willamette Group, 15 stations, gone. I thought about every survivor who'd ever keyed a mic and said, "Is anyone there?" and gotten nothing back. And I thought about the boy sitting next to me, who'd been the first voice to answer mine in 730 days. "We hear you, Bridger Station." "Someone's always left," I said. "The trick is making sure they can find each other without getting found themselves." That was 3 months ago. We're still on the ridge, still silent, still watching. Below us, in the valleys, I sometimes see them moving. Small groups, following the old roads, pausing at the bases of cell towers, lingering near power substations, searching, listening for signals that no longer come. Daria has started planning a different kind of network, not radio, not electronic, something older. Signal mirrors, smoke patterns, coded trail markers, things that don't travel through the air the same way, things they haven't learned to follow yet. And I've started talking again, not into a radio, to Cass, to Daria, in whispers mostly, because old habits die hard, and the 3 of us have all learned to speak quietly, but talking nonetheless. Colleen was right. Someone always answers eventually. The question is, what else is listening when they do? And the answer, I think, is that it doesn't matter. You keep talking anyway. You keep finding ways to say, across whatever distance, through whatever danger, you are not alone. The radio sits in pieces under a workshop 7 miles from a town that no longer exists. 63 miles from here. A lifetime from here. But some mornings, when the wind is right and the air is clear, and Cass is still asleep, and Daria is watching the eastern valleys through binoculars, I sit on this catwalk and move my lips. I compose the broadcast in my head. Temperature, weather, what I see, what I hope. This is Bridger Station, if anyone copies. If anyone copies.